Good morning, Ms. Ayala. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
Before we call the meeting to order, Mr. Greenhill, I'd like to read a declaration from our governor. On March 13th, 2020, Governor Greg Abbott issued a declaration of emergency as a result of the COVID-19 virus outbreak. Subsequently, on March 16th, 2020, pursuant to the authority granted in a declaration, Governor Abbott temporarily suspended the application of certain provisions of the Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, in order to permit telephonic open meetings. This was an effort to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus by avoiding large group meetings while still ensuring continued governmental operations and preserving transparency in the decision-making process. Pursuant to this authority, Tarrant County College gave notice of its intent to conduct today's special meeting as a telephonic and video conference open meeting. 5 trustees will participate in person for this meeting. Myself, Conrad Heed, Dr. Michael Evans, Dr. Gwendolyn Morrison, Mr. Bill Greenhill, Mr. Kenneth Barr. Mrs. Teresa Ayala and Dr. Diane Patrick will participate via video conference or telephonically. We'll now call to order this special meeting of the Board of Trustees of Tarrant County College. And there is no public comment. And I will then turn the program over to our Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Heed. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you our process related to our bond program and your specific questions that you've had. And not only that, but to establish some framework of moving forward, which is really the desire today. You have in your packet a copy of all the slides. So if you have a difficulty, as I would, looking up at the screen and seeing those. And what I'm going to do is kick us off, if you will, in terms of what that agenda is going to look like. And the topic of today is really about accessibility and sustainability goals. That's what we're really after. So after some brief introductions and some background, we will begin with how do peer organizations set sustainability objectives. So we get an indication of what others perhaps are doing and for us, for our consideration. Part 2 of the program would be what objectives has TCC set? What have we done? And what have been our results in this area? And how should they be updated for the future? So a little bit of where we stand, how we got here, and to give some reference point to the future, and also in consideration of what our peers have done. In part 3, we will dig in specifically to the Northwest Campus, the redevelopment strategies there are related to sustainability and accessibility. So we'll begin to see coming to life, if you will, the considerations related to sustainability and accessibility in the Northwest Campus. And then example construction methods will round us out with the agenda, and then have some discussion and talk about next steps. I do want to say this is intended to be very free-flowing. This is not a lecture. This is really to share and to answer your questions in a timely manner. So there's context to whatever the dialogue may be. So this is intended to be a dialogue, although it may seem a little bit scripted here. The intent is to inform and to have you the opportunity to react, respond, and offer whatever you may have related to that. So I do want to, second slide here, talking about the team introductions, just to give you again a refresher, a reminder of the governance structure related to moving forward with a bond program. And obviously the trustees are the ultimate ones responsible for the program itself. Susan is really responsible on the day-to-day basis, and the group gives me both formal and informal updates related to that progress and as time is necessary. The program management, and this is a significant piece that we would not necessarily have every day, but due to the magnitude of a bond program and over a number of years, it's very typical to have a program management assistance, and that is Jacobs. And our two first projects off the bat related to design, the Northwest Campus here today would be Huckabee and Gensler as the architects, and for the South East Campus, Perkins and Will. We have moved along a little bit further in the Northwest Campus development and have selected a construction company in Skanska, and yet to be determined, that RFP is yet to be acted on with the Southeast Campus related to construction. So the background, as we've had discussions in recent months, we've identified 3 policy areas that really require board development for us to move forward in a systematic way with some order here. Those are accessibility and sustainability, and we will address those today in detail. Coming in the future will be technology in January, where we'll have a similar workshop around technology as it impacts not just the bond program, but the overall college in essence. So we want to ensure that that board updates and decision milestones are consistent with your expectations. And that's very critical as we move through this is to understanding what your expectations are. We'll help try to organize dialogue and discussions to get at those expectations, but that's ultimate what our goal is, to ensure that your expectations are met. We did conduct a pre-workshop survey. Thank you for filling that out, to get some baseline information or feedback from trustees and to share a little bit of that. The purpose was to understand the range and preponderance of board preferences on the bond program input and updates. Is really to get a general overview of your thoughts and to learn baseline sustainability framework and expectations of the trustees. So the 9 or 10 questions that you responded to, we appreciate that, and that was the purpose of it. Some of the key takeaways of that is that all need more information on the resiliency of standards. So more in-depth understanding information related to the standards that we'll be talking about today and into the future. There was broad support for a sustainability plan for the board consideration, so that the board does desire to have a sustainability plan as part of the bond initiative, and most cautiously comfortable with new technology. So most of you were responded in that way. Most of you preferred a balance of breadth of needs and available resources. So some balance there as we move forward in making decisions related to trade-offs, and recognizing that all those trade-offs have some form of impact on projects and the scope of those projects. Construction and operating costs were equally important. So a balance there as it relates to, as we look at moving forward, that it is not short-sighted related to saving a buck here or there in construction and then suffering down the road with operating costs. So, and that is very wise to project that. And then there were some comments related to our consultants and relying on those experts. So specifically, the board survey did yield a few things. Much more specific and related to the consensus that quarterly or monthly written or formal reports and website. So the recommendation that we have based upon the information we received from you, that in the near term, monthly topical briefings on upcoming contracts and proposed sustainability plan. So you will see much more detail related to what's coming down the road each month prior to that month, if you will. And so you'll be much better informed and more in detail informed. It will include written plans to be formally adopted and published, the overall plan itself. And there'll be ongoing quarterly reviews as capital projects are completed. The website will be will be developed and will be active, in which one of the responsibilities of Jacobs is to develop that site as the program manager. The expectations that were rallied around were site plans that the desire to see engage in the development of site plans, the MWBE and the hub results that we have already established doing that, but the continuation of that. Sustainability, accessibility, technology application, and results with input on the goals. So not only establishing these plans or these goals or these objectives around these three items, but also what's the outcome? What are the results? What can we expect? And are we meeting those goals? As they become implemented. Wanting the desire, obviously, to see major changes to contracts, and that certainly will be provided. And then major expectations to TCC design standards. So an overall understanding of what are the standards, if you will, moving forward, not just for these projects, but for the next 6-7 years as we engage in these projects and other things, that the standards that we're trying to achieve. So that was really a summary of the survey. And so we're ready to begin here with part one. And the question being, what is accessibility? So Susan, would you please take the stage?
Good morning. So before we get started, I wanted to point out a few visual aids that are in the room so that as we have breaks in the agenda, that you'll have the opportunity to come take a look. But because we're focusing on Northwest as an example of the progress that's being made right now, we've got a model of the new site plan that's underway for that campus, as well as some visual imagery of some of the design work that is happening. So we're excited about it. It's pretty amazing how that campus is going to change. In addition, we've got a couple of notebooks there, one of which is the design standards that we'll talk about for a moment today, just so that you can see the depth and complexity and technical nature of those in case you're interested in understanding that a little bit more, along with the notebook that Huckabee and Gensler has had as they've been researching and applying those standards to the Northwest campus development. So take a look at those as we have breaks this morning. So what is accessibility? So we as the Chancellor mentioned, we've got two themes that we're focusing on today, and the first of which is accessibility. And so you can see the word cloud of sort of what typical understanding of accessibility means in building design. And of course, as a baseline, we're going to comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's sort of the minimum that we all do. But we've also heard and are responding to needs for other types of access, including gender neutral bathrooms and lactation rooms and access to transit and student assistive services as well for students who might have special needs, and how do we support them in our building design, but also support them as we operate moving forward. But in our view, it's actually more than that. Does this work? Oh, sorry, now I've gone too far. So we actually think it's more than that. And so some of the work that Huckabee and Gensler did early on was this exercise, which is an empathy diagram. And so as you can imagine, we've had a huge variety of stakeholders that have been involved in discussions about what our future physical presence will look like. And you can see that the participants were encouraged to think about what they wanted to feel and hear, and what the experience wanted to be, what kind of experience they wanted to have when they entered our facilities in the future. And so what I would say is that we are taking a broader view of accessibility and really thinking about deliberate inclusion. So it's not just about individuals who may have a specific or special need. It's about making people feel comfortable and welcome on campus in a way that they'll take advantage of the services that we offer, spend more time on campus, and improve the success of their performance. And so you can see some of the words there. But what Huckabee and Gensler also did with this work, and it's hard to read on the screen, but you've got it in front of you, is that they actually translated this feedback into what we're calling design drivers. And so there's 6 areas that are sort of the lenses that would be applied to every design decision that's made. And you'll see some of that translated in in the visual images that you have. So, for example, how are we having connectivity between spaces so people can be aware of what's happening throughout the campus? How are we engaging the community? How are we being good stewards of natural resources and so on, which is a topic of the sustainability discussion that we'll have today. How do we create an identity that is recognizable in the community for the partnership that we intend to have? So this ends up being the lens that's applied to the design decisions that they have adopted. So to think about how that's translated into what is currently proposed or underway is that you'll see lots of large open spaces, visibility into some of the learning activities. So there's lots of learning on display, that energy and so on. We hope creates enthusiasm among students and faculty and staff, but also it invites people to wonder what's going on in there and perhaps expand their thoughts about what might be available to them. We've got adjacencies of the different services that we've been working a lot with the 3 goals and 8 principles to plan for those. How do students flow through spaces to access services to make them convenient and accessible and well used? And so when you think about, for example, the Welcome Center and how someone might apply for admission and understand about financial aid and so on, how is all of that planned in such a way that encourages people to have good knowledge about what's available and not be fearful and wander away and perhaps not register with us. And so lots of discussion going into those. You'll see lots of examples of a desire for wellness and bringing the outside in and natural light and so on. Those have important elements related to sustainability and energy use, but they also are important for the wellness of our students and our employees. And then, and this sort of alludes to the adjacencies, but the new ways and processes for helping students navigate the different services. And again, just open and transparent. So I think that the visual images really speak to how they're trying to incorporate all of those accessibility elements into the design. And so here's another visual image too that you'll see from the outside that even from the outside, there's opportunities to see the activity and the engagement of students and faculty and staff. I'd like to pause here and see if we've captured what your thoughts are on accessibility. We're going to spend the bulk of our day on the sustainability issues because of the technical nature of those. But if there's any discussion that the group would like to have, I'd encourage that now.
Yeah, and as you're considering that, I want to punctuate related to accessibility being deliberate in terms of an inclusion objective. Specifically, student input, student survey, has gone into this consideration. What we heard from students as it relates to what they'd like to see in design are open, accessible, and that they feel comfortable. What we may feel comfortable in, they may not feel comfortable in. So there was a great deal uncovered, if you will, engaging the students' input as to how do they want to negotiate the campuses and what comfort level do they have and what would they like to see as it relates to satisfying the being open, being accessible, and for them feeling comfortable.
This is Teresa. Good morning.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Teresa. I was going to ask a question, but you go ahead.
Okay. No, I thank you for that, Michael. Chancellor, I just had a quick question on that. You talked about it's been an inclusive approach, and we've been getting feedback from students. Have we also tapped into those students that have special needs and to make sure that this is equitable as well? Because one of the things I looked at is just visually, you see some of those areas are in different levels. So we want to make sure that if, a student that might have some sort of special needs, they're able to feel included as well. So can you talk a little bit about how we reached out to those communities as well?
Sure. What you'll see a little bit into the presentation here today and the dialogue around how this work got informed. And a great deal of this work was informed through the work of the principals and the student experience and the student success model principle. Those two principles specifically have within their charge to address special need populations. So the work that's coming out of there, the recommendations coming out of there, will inform design and then eventual construction and how we operate, right down to including how we train people. So it's not just about the design or about the construction. It's really about the programs and services and how they are accessed and how we actually perform in those areas.
Thank you.
I'd like to say, G, I love what I'm looking at. Just out of curiosity, what was the process for gathering student input? And let me preface that with saying thank you for getting input from the students. But what was that process?
I don't know specifically. There were surveys done, okay, related to the workspace environment and the environment overall. I can't tell you with any detail or specificity the dialogue that the principal work has had. Perhaps Jack is very close to the principal work, and he could probably, Jack Black from Harris St. Gross could probably chime in related to specifically how that was gathered.
He's looking at me, and then he'll jump in and correct. Is that what you want to do? So one of the things that I'll point out is that a lot of this work has been underway for many years in preparation for the bond program. And so what you'll see in a minute when we look at the Northwest visuals about the stakeholder input, there were student events where they had the opportunity to see visual images like this, not these specifically because they hadn't been designed yet, sure, but to react to them and do dot exercises and so on to provide feedback about what they reacted positively to. And so there have been multiple venues for that. In addition, as the chancellor pointed out, with the panels that are working as well, part of their work is involved developing personas. And so thinking about different types of students and making sure that we deliberately apply that lens. So in some instances, they may be veterans, or they may be first time in college, or they may be, a single parent who's also working, whatever. And there's overlap in those, but it put a framework around deliberate intention of thinking about what their needs are as well.
Some of that work also included the development of personas, mm-hmm, different types of students, right, what they come here with, their expectations. Sure. And so that gets to the inclusiveness piece. It's not just one student, what, sure, they look like, sure, or what they're expecting. Were there 8, 10 personas? 10 personas that were developed. And so the intent was, let's try to capture all what comes to us, mm-hmm, in order to be able to consider how we respond to them from a facility standpoint, a program, sure, standpoint, a service standpoint. And
my reason for asking, if we have a process, then it can be replicated from campus to campus. So that's why I'm asking. It's just, if each student has the opportunity to participate in this, and then we have a process, I think it's good. Again, I appreciate student input, and I just wanted to know we were going to be replicating it from campus to campus. That's all.
Yes, I mean, we're doing this as a college, so the personas were as a college. And obviously, some of the campuses have different makeups, so that's in part why I wanted to be more inclusive, and that's how we ended up with 10.
Approximately how many students were polled, or percentage?
I don't have that data because it's several years old, but it's very hard to do signaling across the room with masks on. So, Jack, I don't know if you want to come up here.
Good morning, everyone. In the short answer to it is it's probably in the neighborhoods of more than 1,000. It was pretty significant as we went to each campus and conducted. I would say the total number has to be over 24 sessions of different types. And we focused them on particular activities within the college, like enrollment and onboarding, sometimes on Learning Commons, which was very extensively done. So the level of input and the way that was cast is a huge amount of data. I would add, too, that a lot of staff and faculty also participated in those, and we tracked which category of input they provided, and there's a lot of data over the whole process.
This is Teresa. I'm sorry, Miss Susan or Jack. I do have another question. Does demographic data tell us about the average age of the student at that particular campus? Just curious.
I don't know the answer to that, do you?
It's actually a very interesting question. When we do the enrollment through IR, students sometimes are younger, but when we did the demographics on campuses, they were typically 23, 24 years old. Those are the ones who are mostly on campus. But remember, those are the students that are probably going to be more traditional students. So that represents about a third of the total population. So it gets very complicated, and it's actually a very interesting study. So sometime we should probably talk more about the entire demographics that we have.
And also because we tend to do much more in dual credit, early college, high schools than our colleagues do, our average age is going to be less than theirs.
Okay. So before we move on to sustainability, I don't know if there's any additional feedback or considerations that staff needs to hear. Okay. All right. So we're going to flip back to the slides. Okay, so you'll notice that today is organized in such a way that we start sort of at a very high level about sustainability and work our way down through multiple layers about what that means to a specific organization. And so we wanted to visit a little bit about how organizations set up their sustainability objectives. And one of the things that at a very high level, some organizations, Dallas College is an example of that, have adopted the United Nations goals for sustainability. And what I found interesting, and I can't make the slide switch, found interesting about this is that the breadth of it. And then when I started thinking about which ones to highlight because they're related to what we do, I couldn't really eliminate any, to be honest with you, because I think that we have a role in every single one of these. And so it obviously starts with no poverty at the beginning, talks a lot about wellness for people and educational attainment, economic development, decent work for people, industry, innovation, and infrastructure, reducing inequalities, and so on, and it goes on, and has peace, justice, and strong institutions at the bottom, as well as building partnerships with other organizations that have those same objectives. And so, again, it's a very broad thought process about what sustainability is, not just your physical building standards and so on that contribute. So I think with the work of 3GAP, we're capturing a lot of this. We recognize our role in the world in terms of all of these objectives, but it is an option that we could consider as a baseline framework moving forward. But it sort of ties our mission together, I think, into the 17 goals that are important to different organizations around the world. So next is you'll see a lot of rating systems that are about resiliency that really their intent is to think about reducing the carbon footprint. And so, again, broader than building standards, but when we talk about LEED and Energy Star and Green Globes and, I'll get to Energy Star in a minute, Green Globes and others, it includes elements related to how you construct your buildings and conserve usage of energy and so on. But it also is, again, much broader than that. Was your site selection appropriate for, where the need was? Is it on a bus line? Do you have, bike racks out front? How are you operating? All of those kinds of things. And so some things are within the control of the organization that's building a building and some things are not. But it's a way of looking at your broad impact on the carbon footprint and what can we do to contribute to improvements there. So I will tell you there are benefits of using a system like this. It allows you to compare or convey sort of aggregate impact versus looking just specifically at electricity or one other element. And it also allows you to compare with other institutions that may have achieved those standards. In every instance, they will have made a different selection of choices to contribute to them achieving that. So there will be differences in every organization, but it allows you to see, you know, how they achieved a certain tier. It also serves the purpose of broadcasting the importance to your community. So sometimes organizations will do it for that purpose. There's some challenges of systems like this as well. And so part of it is it can be administratively expensive to continue certifying over time for LEED and so on. That is why, as of late, the college has really focused on using it as a guide to grade ourselves in terms of whether we're achieving a LEED Silver standard, for example, but hasn't gone through the whole certification process because, again, that's a decision about whether that helps you reach your goals or not. Again, as I pointed out a moment ago, some of the categories are beyond the institutional control, and then, as a focus for our organization, we've also been very focused, rather than going through this exercise, on efficient operations. And so what are we doing in terms of making sure all of our systems are upgraded and working well together, and that we've got operational rules in place that allow us to have some sustainable outcomes and that kind of thing. So, but anyway, this gives you a sense, you know, sort of carbon footprint level is where these tend to be. And I'll share with you that they divide the scorecard up into, and we'll focus on LEED just as an example. I mean, all of them have varying usage, but they are divided up into these categories in terms of areas to focus on, and they're broken down. You can see just sort of there's an illustration that there's a bunch of different items under each one of those. And what our team has been doing is using this to generate discussion around each topic and how is it that they're achieving those objectives in the decisions that we're collectively making as well, and scoring ourselves to some degree. So as you can see, it's location and transportation, it's whether the site's sustainable, it's how are we dealing with water efficiency, it's usage of electricity and gas and indoor environmental quality and so on and so forth. But it's just a framework for us to use that can be consistent across institutions for us to learn more about ourselves and to make plans for how we're going to develop a particular site. So in addition to that, there's also a statutory framework. So back in 2007 was when the first iteration of this was, but statewide there was an effort to reduce energy consumption, again, just focused on a very narrow sliver of what sustainability means. But they adopted rules for state agencies, including higher ed, and really guidelines. I don't know that there's a penalty per se, but it was a goal of reducing our energy consumption, or electricity consumption specifically, by 5% annually. And so I think to some degree that got the conversation started here at the college about how they were going to achieve that. They also had a couple of other minor requirements in that legislation, including that we are required to post on the internet, and we do, reports about our consumption of electricity, gas, and water. Certain things like using more effective light bulbs and establishing a recycling program, all of which we've done. So then moving on from the statutory framework, here at the college, there has been a pretty significant amount of master planning happening over time to prepare not only for what the student needs would be over time, but also to take care of the assets that we have and plan for improvements thereof. And so going all the way back to 2004, there was an audit and a master plan that was updated thereafter about the buildings and the campuses across the district, turned into institutional plans in 2013, and probably the most recent iteration of that is all of the work that Jack's firm has done in 2017 with a lot of those visioning efforts that we just described that included a range of stakeholders, leading to 3G8P and then ultimately the 2019 bond program. So again, integrating operations and how we serve with what the physical manifestation of all of those needs are. So that's the most recent iteration of that. So There's also a variety of specific system plans. And I will tell you that I've been very impressed. You know, I've only been here just over a year, and there's a lot of talent on the team that have put these plans together, and perhaps without a cohesive adoption of a sustainability plan, but they certainly were thinking about ways to conserve energy and to invest the capital dollars appropriately. And so going back to 2005, you can see the range of things that related to irrigation, then thereafter looking at our utility consumption, a stormwater master plan so that we can manage our stormwater runoff, thermal energy plans, and then electrical plans as well. And you can see that they aren't static. They change over time as technology changes and as we plan our capital investments as well, because those continue to evolve. So I think that the leadership within RENF has done a good job of managing this in the background. One thing I will mention too is that we actually, as we were preparing for this, it's been a good exercise for us to understand how we were describing the efforts. As far back as 2010, there was a draft sustainability plan that was really interesting to go back and read and think about the groundwork it laid for a lot of this effort. And when we get to our recommendation in a minute, I think it would be appropriate for us to be updating that and incorporating the goals that this board currently has. So then moving on from master planning, let's see. So our next effort, and part of this was probably in response to a lot of the efforts at the state level telling us to reduce our energy and water consumption. You can see we ended up developing MEP standards to be thinking about how the entire system needed to be updated and integrated to get good results. There were also comprehensive technical guidelines that were published in 2014 and have continued to be updated annually. And one of the things I'll point out, that giant notebook over there, so you can take a look at it, includes a lot of those technical guidelines, and it serves a couple of purposes. It allows some continuity between generations of employees who are here working on it. It's a communication tool with our consultants and our firms that we hire to build stuff, so they understand what our requirements are and so on. And one of the things that I've been pleased to hear is talking to our consultants that we've engaged, and they're actually very impressed with the quality of these. A lot of the building codes for the different cities have grown in such a way that they've continued to tighten as they've complied with energy codes at the state level and that kind of thing. And so gradually everybody is ratcheting their way up to that with new construction, but our standards actually exceed what those expectations are of the regulatory agencies, and we've gotten really good feedback from the firms about what those look like. Key provisions again, and you saw some of this with our discussion at the board meeting in October about chillers and some of that not real exciting infrastructure that needs to be updated and maintained, but also planning for the placement of future facilities and how they'll be served and whether the existing infrastructure has the capacity. So it's a combination of all of those things. We've also been in the process of extensive building automation as well, which is an important use of technology to operate our buildings. So what we're going to suggest, and we're going to have a whole section here in a minute about how we get to what the goals are, but that our recommendation is that we do dust off that older plan and accumulate a lot of this good work that's happened over the years and that the board has funded over the years. So it's been remarkable, the progress, but into a sustainability plan that the board adopts, and it has a variety of objectives as well. So it's not just compliance with what we're required to do by state statute and city code and so on, but it goes further than that and sets specific targets related to reduction of our use of natural resources and so on. We want tangible operational efficiencies, curriculum innovations. This board has talked a lot about that. So how do we fit into our sustainability plan, not just guiding our work, but also being a tool in terms of how we interact with students and faculty. And then it's important for us to be communicating the importance of this to the community, because I think it enhances the reputation of TCC to be a participant in this, and it allows us to engage employees, students, and the community effectively. So and we'll talk about next steps at the conclusion of this meeting, but that will be our recommendation, is to be working on a document for your consideration with your guidance and input. So the next section covers some how we performed in the goals, but I'd like to pause there and see if there's some feedback on what you've heard so far.
This is Teresa. Mr. Heed, may I pose a question, please? So, Susan, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So once we establish this plan that you're talking about, how does it incorporate, or how do we, I'm not even sure how to ask the question. So if you have TCC Northwest Campus that's located near water, it's an open air, lots of land there, how do we explore things outside of what's in the plan itself based on the location of the campus and the resources available to us at that campus? Does that make sense?
So are you just suggesting that broader than the campus development and design, how are we part of that larger community and our sustainability goals?
Yes, because, or what sort of leeway, I guess, what is, I'm just trying to say, if you have the sustainability goals, but yet you have a campus, for example, a Northwest campus that's located near water, and there might be other resources available to us, how do we incorporate or explore those resources as something to enhance the sustainability of the campus?
So can you give me an example of what you mean by using that water source?
So let's just say, you use wind turbines, or I'm just throwing something out there, and you use some sort of, I don't know, something because the lake is there. I'm just wondering, I'm not an engineer, of course, but I just wondered, how do we look at those things, or how do we anticipate that we will look at each campus and see what resources are available based on where it's located to be able to enhance the sustainability of that campus?
Sure. So I think as we design and develop those, our consultants are helping us with that thought process already. And one of the reasons I think we had originally hoped to have this meeting up at Northwest was an opportunity to see that visually we're taking significant advantage of the lake and the terrain leading to that lake as an asset to the campus. And so where the Performing Arts Center, for example, will be, will takes advantage of the grade change for the seating, and then has visual access to the lake and so on, and much more oriented towards using that as an asset than perhaps we have in the past. One of the things that we'll talk about in a minute is that sometimes using sustainable energy isn't about having wind turbines, as an example that you provided on your own property. It's about accessing your electricity supply from providers who are using renewable energy sources. And so we'll talk about that in just a moment as well. So I do think that we are talking a lot about the site as appropriate. One of the things I'll mention too is I've had a conversation recently with, there actually is a committee on Northwest that talks about sustainability issues. And there's discussion about how the connectivity of sidewalks and so on across 820 are going to be updated with the trail system and so on with the city of Fort Worth, and how does that affect pedestrian and bike access to our campus? And so being engaged in those kinds of initiatives as well, making sure that we're part of the community on that, I think is really important. So sort of a case by case thing, I guess I'm saying to you, but I think it's on everybody's mind to make sure that we're thinking about ourselves in the larger context. Does that answer your question?
Can you hear me? Yes, it does. Thank you. I just want to make sure that we're thinking outside the box. And so we have this framework, but yet we have to look at what's available at that campus, because there may be some resources there that we just have, let's look at it and say, hey, look at where this is located. There's a water source here. It's open air. It's, there's plenty of space. What are we doing to think outside the box to really make that campus something that we could be proud of, and that the students will able to benefit from the things that we do there. So thanks.
Generally speaking, we're moving forward as a college, and we want to ensure that, though, this is not a cookie cutter McDonald's with arches every place. And so there's a balance between taking into consideration what we need to standardize on from efficiencies and effectiveness standpoint, and what do we need to really focus on as it relates to the sense of a particular campus and the assets that it has and where it is and maybe the population it serves, in addition to the programs that are at that campus. They differ from campus to campus. So that is a constant balancing act, if you will. So to specific to your question, Ms. Ayala, there's a broader context to this as to ensuring that we do retain and really celebrate the differences in the campuses.
Okay, thank you.
If I could, I would just echo what Ms. Ayala is saying. As I think about it, each of our campuses has some unique features about it. For example, our downtown campuses can relate to the river, just like Northwest can relate to the lake and the environment it sits in. You asked for a progress report on the presentations today. I would observe a couple of things. I think the board, and I'm sure in the past the board has been well aware and well informed about the process to gather information that Mr. Black talked about, the 1,000, 2,000 meetings and so forth. I've certainly never heard any detailed explanation about that process. I think that's the foundation. If I understand where you're headed, that's the foundation everything is built on. So I think it might be beneficial to refresh the board's memory about how we started and what's been done in a little bit more detail. Over time, we get new people and some of us forget things. I think that would...
Yeah, I think we can start at 2016. And I think Jack can give a general overview and a little bit more specific as to how this work came together, if that's what that's what we're talking about.
Yeah,
sure.
I think that would be helpful to understand the whole process.
Right, because what you're going to see a little bit down the road here is a reference to the work of the principal work and how it's informed this work. So maybe the context of how we got to that. Jack, can you do that, please?
Well, that's fine. I'm not suggesting we have to do it right now. I don't know what the schedule is, but I think at some point we need to. I'll leave it up to you all as to whether we do it. Now, I had one other observation I'd like to make before we move on. On some of these things, we've talked about reporting on MWB, energy usage, and stuff like that. Can you all come up with a systematic approach to when the board is informed? Reporting to the board sort of creates an accountability on these things, and I think it helps us appreciate the progress that's being made. So recycling is one I heard a minute ago. I'm not aware of any reporting to the board about anything in that area. Some of those programs are very important because the fact that it's going to be briefed to the board at some point will create some accountability and some efforts to respond in those areas.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because early on we talked about one of the real major goals today is expectations of the board. And these things have been done, they've been developed, but frankly, there hasn't been the reporting that you've talked about. It just hasn't been the historical exchange, if you will, or how a board was informed. We can certainly do that. But I want to just bring context. It's not out of lack of desire or will to do so. It just hasn't been practiced.
And you may recall that with, for example, the MWBE, we made a commitment that we would report back at least quarterly on how we were doing against our new metrics that have been established in terms of the efforts and results around that. And then I think that by adopting a sustainability plan that includes some elements like recycling as an example, that lends itself to an obligation of at least annually coming back and grading our paper against what the plan was, and then figuring out if there's a need to push the envelope a little further on some of the objectives or add something, for example. So we absolutely can do that. Okay. All right. So can we put the slides back up, please? And so let's talk a little bit about how we performed and what goals should be set. I'm not going to ask you to make those decisions today. I want to provide a little bit of a framework about what we have in mind, and staff has got more research to do to understand what some of our peers are doing and learn from that. and start to put a baseline for you guys to react to after the first of the year. One thing I'll mention is, for example, Trustee Ayala had sent a sample presentation that Austin Community College has done in terms of their sustainability planning. And it provides a good, robust, broad view of sustainability for them. And so it's providing us some guidance to think about how to structure this as well. And we'll do that with other institutions as well. So some of the key programs that have been implemented and would be captured in a plan is, but just to give you a little bit of background, back in 2014, the board actually received a presentation on EUI, which is the electricity units that are used and measured on a per square foot basis, so that you've got some comparability. And we talked about that last week in terms of the good results that we've been accomplishing with that. And at that time, we were at 119, and the goal was to get down to 95. We've achieved that. We're at 83. Compared to higher education, which averages around 84. We've started looking at some of our peers who tend to be more progressive. They're in the mid 70s. But anyway, we think that it would be appropriate for us to set goals around that. And it'll be particularly interesting, in my view, to also look at it campus by campus, because again, when we replace buildings with bricks falling off of them up at Northwest with modern, sustainable systems, I think we're going to start to see some real results in terms of our overall progress. And so I think that's going to be a really exciting opportunity to look at how that looks. Just as a reminder, over the last decade, we had a 30% reduction in our energy consumption and a 45% reduction in energy costs. And part of that was because we also renegotiated our electricity provider contracts and partnered in the statewide effort to get some better rates associated with that larger volume. We've had a 44% reduction in water consumption during that time as well. A lot of that has to do with watering practices and plant materials and that kind of thing. So lots of programs. Again, I think that the even without bundling it up and putting a bow on it, the staff has been really engaged in implementing a lot of different programs. And so irrigation, in this example, is computerized, and it's based on plant survival. And also we've focused on more drought tolerant plants and those kinds of things. Managing chemicals, that's important as well. We've got a management plan and a contractor who helps us with all kinds of things, like what we use in our chemistry labs, for example. So there's systems around that. The stormwater management plan I mentioned already, recycling, we're doing 178 tons of trash in 2019. At the moment, I don't know if that's good or bad, to be honest with you. I think that we're going to have some context around that to understand whether we're achieving what we need to. We also amended our electricity contracts going forward that 70 to 100% of the green power are based on green power renewable wind energy. And so again, it has a lot to do with not necessarily what you can always do on your own campus, but the providers that you're using there. And we do have some wind and solar energy production with the facilities that we have down at South. And then finally, I'll mention continuous commissioning. You'll actually even see a contract related to this on your board agenda in November, that we've had a long-term engagement with Texas A&M to help us with this effort. But we also engage firms to constantly be tuning and looking at maintenance and so on all of our major systems to ensure that they're operating at optimal health and to allow us to achieve some of our goals. And this is a big factor in what lots of organizations see in terms of aiding them in reducing their energy consumption. And so you'll see the contract for next week as we get them on board for the Northwest stuff. It's good to have them engaged early and throughout the development process, so that then once we start opening facilities, then they're certainly playing a role in that. We've also added ultra efficient electrical equipment that's noted there. We've done some things in IT related to getting rid of some of our servers by consolidating them. That's an energy reduction tactic. We've got automatic hibernation of PCs just so that they aren't sitting on people's desks all night instead of shutting down like they should. And that results in a lot of energy savings. We've got motion sensors across lots of our campus in the classrooms to make sure that we're eliminating lighting when it's not in use. And then, of course, as you see in the bathrooms that have been renovated, the hands-free and water-efficient devices there. So lots of thought has gone into making these improvements over the years as we've touched different facilities. So I'll point out a little bit of the recognition that the college has received as well. So we've achieved the goals of the Better Building Challenge here in Fort Worth that was intended to have a 20% reduction by 2020. Obviously, we've exceeded that. We continue to get Smart Water Awards. And again, this is just grading ourselves against the criteria that they set as a challenge for different organizations. I mentioned already the continuous commissioning, and we've actually had the opportunity, or staff has, to under Walt's leadership, the ability to present that at conferences as a best practice in terms of how organizations use that tool. We continue to get rebates from Encore, our electrical provider, because of the work that we've done. And then really to Trustee Ayala's point, when you think about different sites having different attributes, even things like having monarch butterfly way stations and being a tree campus like we have been designated at Southeast because of its location, and a bee campus that we've, so all of those kinds of things weigh in on what we're achieving and speak to the differences among our campuses and what they offer. So let's talk a little bit about potential goals. And this is another spot where we would welcome your feedback and discussion. And you'll note that there's a lot of blanks of what's not filled in, because I don't think that we know yet what our recommendation would be in terms of setting goals that are aggressive in terms of pushing us to do more yet attainable. We want to balance those two things, but again, we've still got sort of hanging out there at the state level this notion of reducing our electricity consumption by 5% per year over the next period of time. Obviously over time that gets harder and harder to do. But I've also got really high hopes for some of the massive campus redevelopments that we're doing as we replace 50-year buildings. It may be very attainable to do that just based on that alone. So that'll be an exciting thing to see as the bond program is implemented. I mentioned to you a moment ago the EUI rating that we're at 83, and what does that need to be going forward, so we can really think about it in terms of square footage and make sure we've got a good comparison there. How do we measure water usage, and are we doing well when you think about the volume of people on our campus? This year's created kind of an oddity in the middle of our data for sure on electricity and water consumption, but it's certainly something that we should set a goal around. President Heed and I have had a conversation about net zero. We need more research on that to understand what are those goals, and how does that fit into what we can control and what we can't, and what are other organizations doing. But we've got that on the list to consider. We've had a discussion about construction waste. Where does it go, and does some portion of it get recycled appropriately, and does it end up in the right place when you're creating as much waste as we will with our campus redevelopments? We're in the process right now with the 3G8P work as well on the workplace environments. And one of the objectives with the way that we are redesigning the workplace is to go more paperless. And we're implementing a number of things to help that. Actually, the at-home work has been a crash course in that. I think for all of us, I think we're all printing less than we probably thought we needed to before. But there's standards around that too. But we don't have good measures in place yet in terms of how much work we're doing there, and what impact does that have ultimately on our contracts with Xerox, for example, and so on. Some of the technology improvements that we have underway that we're working on, electronic signature routing, the new ERP in terms of how we can use the system and have reports set up online that are available to us. There's all kinds of opportunities for us to use systems to improve paperless, but we need to have a measure to understand whether we make any progress or not. Another thing related to technology is also device consolidation. One of the things that Bob Pacheco is working on this year with the refresh cycle of all of the devices is starting to work with standardization reasonably of equipment. I mean, it's not universal because there's certainly unique needs out there, but also starting to condense people down to singular devices instead of having a desktop and a laptop to take home and a tablet and what have you, that we've got some redundancy out there, that it's a real opportunity as we replace that equipment to think about how we can consolidate effectively, reduce our capital costs, and also reduce our operating costs associated with some of that. So And I put the little ... there because I'm sure there's many more, and we would welcome hearing from you about what's on your mind in these areas that we haven't missed, and not necessarily just today. If you think of it later, that we'll add in. But again, I want to emphasize that staff is going to do a lot of research about what some of our progressive peers out there are doing, and learn from that experience, and hopefully provide a framework for us to start editing rather than starting from a blank sheet of paper. But I'd welcome your comments on that.
I know EUI is some kind of a standard. Would you kind of explain what that is?
Yeah, it's basically your energy consumption on a per square foot formula, and it gives you a ranking so that you can look at other buildings, not only within your campus as a thought process on it, but also your peer agencies, and have something to grade yourselves against. And I probably have a whole lot of people in the room that could explain that a lot better if you'd like a deeper explanation of that.
And EUI of 0 would be net zero energy?
So not necessarily, because I think net zero energy thinks about how you're pumping energy back into the grid. Perhaps organizations that would still be consuming energy, right? And so they're EUI and energy consumption. So I don't think that those are necessarily equivalent thoughts, but we will flesh that out certainly as we look at what the measures ought to be.
Okay.
Mr. Heat, I have a question, please. This is Teresa.
Go ahead.
Ms. Alanis, Susan, I don't know if this is necessarily where we would bring this up, but you talked about those sustainable programs, which I think are fantastic. I love the things we're doing, especially around tree programs and the bees over at Southeast Campus. But I wondered, of those sustainable programs that you mentioned, I think there was things around renewable energy, recycling, things like that. Do we offer programs and certifications and things like that through TCC in those areas? Do you know?
I don't know off the top of my head, but one of the things that I've found in looking at other plans is that the intent is to have a linkage between what we are doing and implementing as a college with curriculum and faculty and student engagement. And so that will certainly be an element of what we're looking at going forward.
Okay. And second to that question is, I did notice the Southeast Campus has the tree program and the bee programs. Are we also connected with Texas Parks and Wildlife and some of these other organizations where we can partner with them that would help us as maybe doing some research at some of these campuses and things like that going forward? Do you know?
I don't believe that we are right now. Obviously in my prior life, we had a lot of interaction with them with our park system, but certainly building those relationships and nurturing those partnerships will be an important part of us delivering our objectives here.
Okay, thank you.
In regard to reducing construction waste, how does that work? Is that our job? Is that our contractor's job?
So it would be our contractor's responsibility in action to be separating waste and diverting it to the appropriate landfills. But that's going to be a discussion, I suspect, among Jacobs, the design team, Skanska, and the instance of Northwest, to just talk about what's possible and what the expectations would be and how we execute that. So it's sort of a shared responsibility for us to figure out what we want to do in those regards, but certainly it's going to be an activity that they would have hands-on with as construction and demolition happens. So I don't know if do you want to take a break really quick before okay. Yeah, I'm getting the sign. Yes. I was missing it. And then we'll move on to talking specifically about Northwest and how all this translates out there as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a 10-minute break. If that's sufficient, Mr. Greenhill.
Can you hear me okay, though, for now?
Ready? If Mr. Greenhill is ready, we will resume the meeting.
So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Michael Ufer, who's with Gensler, and he's been one of the principals on the design effort with Northwest. And again, just because of the stage that Northwest is at with the years of progress as well as where we are in design, it's a really good illustration about how we're applying some of the discussion that we've had this morning so far. So he'll lead you through a review of the Northwest campus.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, board, for having us here today. It's a real honor to not only be here with you, but to be serving you on the Northwest campus. I'm going to need the slides to cue. I'm not as smart as Susan, so I didn't have my paper printed. So one of the things that we're going to dive into today is the sustainable aspect of the site, and I do encourage you to take a look at some of the imagery and the models. And what you haven't seen here is the 9 models that go before this that we have studied and looked at all kinds of assets on. So as we get into this, when you look at the campus, when we look at the campus, we look at the infrastructure that is there. And that was really our starting point, what needs to happen, what needs to be done. And you know, TCC and their guidelines and all their forward thoughts have really, really focused on what needs to be done to be energy efficient. So there are 3 buildings that got kept because of that: the central utility plant, the WHPE, which is an auditorium and gymnasium, and the WACB building, which is the conference room there at the end, or the classroom conference room at the end. So with that, sorry, we'll go to the next slide. We did a very robust study in how the existing, yeah, that's perfect, thank you. The existing campus was maintained and what the condition of that is over the years. As Ms. Anthony said that the bricks were falling off. There are other things when you remove the bricks that you find because there were cracks in the bricks, and over time things have, as you can see, deteriorated to a point to where the infrastructure of that building were not in good enough condition to continue. We also looked at 21st century learning modules, flexibility. You want these new buildings to be there for 50 years. And how does that really impact when you use the old structure? And some of the structural grids were not of the cadence for that flexibility. Next slide. As you can see, when we think about the existing campus, we also think about what we need to change in order to meet that 21st century learning, and the idea of this is a place for students not only to be recruited, but retained, as well as faculty and staff. And we're creating environments for both the faculty and staff and students to thrive. And when you see the infrastructure here, the campus and the outside spaces, there's not an inside-out relationship due to the scaffolding and things that had to be put in place. Next slide. And when you look at that, you can see some of the cracks in the brick and some of the different things in terms of water that has come into the building and those state of repairs. So we did evaluate each and every building and came back with a recommendation, and we have determined that in order to meet that 50-year mark and meet sustainability, you can see some of the things here really focus on the building envelope. And what we don't know what the EUI would be on this, but it'd probably be really high because of the inefficiencies that were built in the 70s and the degradation of that infrastructure. Next slide. You talked a lot about what has been done, and I just want to applaud ASG and Jack for his team. The white book here is all of the data by campus. It is what we use to start our initiation into the Northwest campus with all the campuses. And I want to say that we've embraced the level of commitment as an enterprise plan, which is all campuses. So as we met with the 3GAP in advisory panels and had the pleasure to present to the All Champions, it was really with a global TCC presence that we focused on Northwest. And as we learned the amenities that Northwest has as the site in the lake, really focusing on the context of that for the design and for those sustainability efforts. So what you see before you is really the stakeholder input. It is, we have had, and Kirby asked a question of us the other day. It's like, hey, how many meetings have we had? And we didn't have any idea, so we counted. There are 102 meetings so far to date that the Huckabee Ginsler team has had in order to get this Northwest campus going and to get the All Champions and all the enterprise plan going. So it is a robust, very thorough, very driven process that we know from our years of experience doing higher education work that are proven as we go through this. So you'll see not only the advisory panel meetings, but you'll see some student stakeholder meetings that were taken. All of the panels that you see, ASG has done a great job of documenting that, and it was green dot, red dot, and different criteria. And I encourage you to look at the book over here that has been done, because it was really our point of departure. Along with that, we get information from the advisories, and as we get that, that gets included in the book, and there's actually 2 books now. All right, next slide. So one of the things that you heard earlier was design drivers, and these came out of lots and lots of meetings of listening to what the future state of TCCD would like to be, not only in its branding, but its campus and its site. So at the top, you see the 6 design drivers, and the 3 bars are new building, renovated building, and other assets of that building and the space types. So when you look at these, it's really important to understand all the different parts and pieces of it. The site's very important, and that's the middle bar there. And the red dots represent how they relate to each one of those design drivers. And as you saw in the 6 blue dots that were represented by these words, there are criteria that we use as our guidelines to take forth when we design this that came from the different user groups that we met with. Next slide, please.
Let me ask a question. What does the plus sign represent on your?
The plus sign represents, and I'm going to have to use my glasses, excuse me. It is efficiency. Certainly, thank you. And so as we go through this, you'll see some imagery where the other schemes that you didn't see went through this same kind of criteria, so we could optimize not only our positioning on the site, but how sun and shading might work and how the temperatures, the bottom chart kind of represents, it is the dry bulb temperatures throughout the year, throughout the time the sun is up. So as you can see, the middle months, as we all know, in July, August, and September, Texas is hot. So we need to be aware of that. And what you see to the side of that is basically looking at not only the summer solstice, but the winter solstice, so we can better understand how we orient the buildings. So we looked at not only energy use, but the use of daylight and how that came into the building. And you'll see in some of our designs that we have a skylight at the top and openings throughout the floor to bring that natural light in to really increase the wellness of those users in the building. We looked at glare, and glare in this case could be off the lake, it could be off of different materials, but we were very, very aware of the materials that we selected so that we were reducing that energy negativity, if you will, that dealing with that glare and that heat. We've also optimized the thermal barriers, which means that you'll see in a minute that we have actually have barrier ratings that are higher than code minimum. And a lot of that is due to Walt and his team's work in saying, here's what we need to be energy optimal. And they're called R values, or radiant values for the walls. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. And we also looked at things like heat gain, solar heat island effect. For instance, if you have a large concrete plaza, you're going to need to shade it because it will not only heat up, but it will retain that heat over a period of time and radiate it back. So really being aware of those kinds of things. Next slide. So when we came upon the final solution or the solution that we're representing right now, you'll see all the different sides of the building represented. And this was a model that turned 360 degrees, but you see not only the summer solstice, but the winter solstice here and how it heated the building. The tops of the building being the hottest, but what this was for is it really had us study as where we wanted the glass surfaces. So they're all on the north side in terms of the big atrium spaces that we know are great for students to be in and see and be seen, better known as the Commons in Building 2 and the Learning Commons Atrium in Building 4, which is two of the buildings that connect. I again want you to see the model because you can kind of see the open areas in the model where those atriums connect visually. So it hasn't been without lots of study, lots of rigorous ideas and using the tools of the industry today to orient the buildings on the site for optimal energy use, but also to create places that students want to be. We know that students are more successful when they are retained on campus, meaning they want to be there. So there's lots of student success spaces throughout all the buildings, and there are lots of amenities that allow them to stay on campus. One of the first things we witnessed was as students between classes actually going back out to their cars. Well, if we could retain them on campus and have them gather and talk about things, we know that's where education really takes off. Next slide. We know Texas is hot, so we have 3 different shading strategies that we used. The first one is actually canopies on the building entries where there are glass doors and transparency into the facility. So that is, if you were to zoom in on that or on your print, you'll see a number 1, and that's where that is happening on campus, very purposefully connecting those entries for intuitive wayfinding. Number 2 is the use of landscape and trees. We know that students want to hang out, but we're very surprised even when it's hot, they hang out outside. So providing shading places for them, not only under the trees and letting the trees connect architecturally to the buildings, giving them further meaning, but places outside to hang out in the shade. And the third strategy is actual shading structures. So if you look to the red squares on the plan there, you'll see some shading structures, one between the main entry from the north parking lot, between the central utility plant and WHPE, that corridor being really celebrated and being shaded, so a place where students can hang out and congregate. And then on the western end of the campus towards the bottom, you can see shading structures over what we call the Lakeview Terrace. And it's basically an outdoor space with view to the terrace. It can be much like a space to gather for performances. It's a place to just gather if nothing's going on, but it is a place with a great view, and the wind comes up through there and has a self-cooling effect. Next slide. As well as all the things we talked about, we really thought about how do students use and faculty use a campus? How do visitors come into that campus? So we think that building 2 being the L-shaped building on the lower right-hand side, being that entry place where onboarding is, that we need to provide visitor parking there, really enhancing that first experience to the campus. But then you have all the other parking. So we know that it's at worst about a 6-minute walk from the furthest place on campus to the center of campus, not to the first building you get to, but to the center of campus. So some of the things we've looked at are walkability and then providing shade within the parking lot as you walk along. There are trees in the parking lot that cause the parking lot to be a much better place than it is today. Next slide. So this is where we really focused on bringing the 6 design drivers home. When you think about the site accessibility and you think about some of the words that we used, like connectivity, and that connectivity is really promoting intuitive wayfinding. And we have more to share with you on that. But when you think of the site, how do you organize the site so you intuitively know where the buildings are and where you need to go? And how to reference those buildings again, so that when you're back out in it, you can actually use that to wayfind. We also focused on stewardship, and this is really not only bringing the indoor out and the outdoor in, but providing windows that make those spaces that much bigger. Beautifully landscaped areas that have a view not only create harmony and that welcoming environment and that home kind of feel that the students want to hang out in, but it also says you care about them. And we know with the zero-scape plans that we're working through, the watering requirements have been thought about, and that's part of the efficiency piece. Community, this is really where we're creating fun and vibrant spaces. Right now in this, we envision things like community health fairs that could take place between the buildings on a weekend. Why? Well, if they come and see the TCC brand here, the buzz in the community is going to be very much heightened, and everybody's going to want to come see it. So it's a natural. It also connects with the community and gives the student great places to be as well. So when we think about clarity, without a doubt, the most important piece to the Northwest campus in particular was we need to know where we're going. We need that intuitive wayfinding piece, and we can't wait to show you some of the things that we're doing with that in terms of Texas iconology and each building having a different characteristic that you'd know where you are just by what you're looking at. Identity, and this is really leveraging the surrounding natural assets. And you talked a little bit about, is this just for the Northwest campus? I think every campus needs to go through this kind of exploration of not only the amenities, but the assets that they have. And we've had the pleasure to visit all the different campuses, and each one has a different character. But with what you're doing in the enterprise plan and with branding and wayfinding right now, it really allows the TCC brand to shine. And that part of that story is the sustainability and the accessibility pieces that make TCCD what it is today. And I'll just take the last one in terms of efficiency. And this is really where we're developing the facilities not only to be performance oriented, but to be student friendly, to provide spaces that they want to be for them to embrace and be retained on campus. We know when they stay on campus, they're much more successful. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about LEED. We talked about those characteristics of the LEED environments. And what we have done here is there are several steps to the LEED process, meaning you can have several levels of targets, from certified to silver to gold to platinum. And what we know is your peer institutions have targeted silver because it is easier to achieve and a good return on investment for the institution. So when you think about silver, it is not the bottom line, but it is where institutions find themselves, because when you get into gold and platinum, there are different kinds of metrics that make it more costly and possibly not a good advantage to the institution. So those are things that we've studied, and we're using the LEED scorecard as a resiliency silver scorecard for things that create the roadmap for the Northwest campus. And you could use this LEED scorecard as a checklist for every campus, and it allows you to have different attributes within it to still be sustainable. And with the guidelines that TCC has done, really a robust model for where you're going in your future.
Can you reference, hard to read the right side, those are the silver standards, correct?
Yes,
Could
sir.
you reference them to your bullets as it relates to, are all those bullets
I'd be
silver
glad to.
standards? Are those bullets silver standards, or how would you explain those?
Thank you, Chancellor. The bullets, as we took them, embrace each piece, but these are how we started to achieve some of those, and I'll just read some of them. Code minimum is an R value of 13. Our walls have an R value of 25. We looked at some of the things in the pandemic that are becoming good practice, and that is air sterilization and disinfection within the HVAC units themselves, and those have been incorporated into the mechanical system. When you look at lighting in particular, and we'll talk about the different lighting opportunities here in a minute, but LED in particular with smart controls creates a whole different platform for TCCD and how that is energy efficient and how that data can be used and harvested for the good of the students and the faculty and staff. The other piece is water. We talked a little bit about it, really focusing on low use plumbing fixtures, the faucets themselves, the valves at each toilet and urinal. And then, for instance, because of the practice of science, the mechanical system does once through air because you don't want to repeat those chemicals, but if they were to be airborne. The challenge with that is how do you recover that heat or that cooling to temper the air coming in? Well, you can do that now very easily with heat recovery wheels, and that's something that we have implemented at the Northwest campus in the science wing to temper that incoming outside air. So those are just some of the things that we've done, Chancellor. Energy modeling and energy metering at each building for water and for electricity allows you to see and understand what's going on within each individual building a little bit better. And if something goes astray with the system, you can then compare and find out which building it is, and then focus in on that to repair or recommission that area. Did that answer your question? Any questions?
I just want to ensure that your explanation informs the board related to what some of the efficiencies we're talking about in the bullets and what is their relationship to, in this case, a silver certification.
Thank you. And the way it is, the scorecard, as it's called for LEED, each individual piece gets different points. And for silver, the minimum is 50. And right now on the Northwest campus, we're sitting at 55. So we build in those criteria based on that. And one of the credits we got, because it's something you already do, and that's you buy green energy. So it's more encompassing than just the energy use. It is really a sustainable plan, as Susan said, recovering or refining that sustainable plan that you did years ago. And these are some of the things that we look forward to bringing to light as we get to review that plan as well.
I think the question that he's asking is, or for me is, okay, silver is really good. I have no question about that. So what are we missing? What's something that's more difficult in a higher level that we shouldn't be, that you're not recommending that we do?
Well, something that we could do, and I can't read this as you can't read this.
No,
so
I can't. I'm just asking.
I know.
The question. Yeah.
So there's some things that we could do from a site standpoint that might be something you would do, like when you get runoff water, you can do what's called a bioswale, and that takes and treats that water and can contain that water. And we've studied that, and we've looked at the operational expenses of that. So that's something that we've studied, and we've said not a good return on investment. So it's things like that. We've studied every single one of these and looked at how it might apply. And For instance, if you did a more costly mechanical system, you can get to that next level of points for that, but it's not a good return on investment. Does that make any sense?
So what you're saying is that this chart is a combination of silver and a bunch of other things. Is this whole chart just silver?
Great question. So it's not, the chart is not prescriptive. The chart is all inclusive. So you may have the 64 things that are on this. You just have to achieve the right amount of points to get silver, gold, or platinum or certified. And you can pick and choose. So for instance, transportation, because you have a bus route on the campus, it actually gets you a point. Because you have public transportation. I feel like I'm not answering your question.
So specifically, the bullets are the ones that we would score.
That's right.
Okay, so the bullets are the ones that we would score. I mean, the right side is the menu. We're not going to eat everything on the menu. We're going to eat these bullets here.
That answers it.
Food kind of makes sense to me to reference.
That's good.
Okay.
Got it.
Awesome.
Okay. Regarding the exterior walls, have you looked into ICF construction? Is this kind of a minimum here that you're looking at?
This is with a typical stud and frame construction, a balloon frame construction, and we'll get into ICF conversations here. It's right next. As it relates, and there are certain criteria with ICF that when we reviewed it and we looked at the code pieces, we're going to share a little bit more about that specifically for you because of the way it controls the spaces on campus and the way the code works. Is that a good way to put it, Paul? So I'd like to introduce, okay.
Mr. Heed, I had a question, if you don't mind. This is Teresa.
Go ahead.
Yes, Sarah, thank you so much for this presentation. It's been very informative. My question to you is, you talked a little bit about when you were answering a question to Mr. Mr. Greenhill about an option that y'all explored. So can you just elaborate a little bit on the predictive analytics that you're using that determines whether or not something is we should be exploring it further or not?
That's a really great question. Thank you. Where we look at this and we look at the point and we say, how much will this cost and what will it cost over time to maintain? That is how we kind of look at it. And is it future forward? Is it in the best interest of TCC to spend the extra dollars to get that point? So we've looked at points in the best sense of the best return on investment to TCC to maintain or retain that silver resiliency. You're on mute.
We lost audio.
I'm sorry. I said, what are the factors? Is it cost? Is it when you say about maintenance, future? I mean, how far do you go? What are those things that you're looking at? What numbers are you plugging in?
Well, since we have the CMAR, the construction manager at risk, Skanska on board, so it's a very good opportunity to say, if we did these things, what other things would those impact from a construction standpoint? And what would the dollars be ballpark-wise to do that? And then you have a discussion about what that means to the physical construction. And this in particular, the bioswale is a site issue where it requires a retention pond that would require more maintenance than normal when you filter out all the impurities in the runoff water.
Thank you for that.
Certainly.
So as we transition to the next segment, I wanted to point out that we're going to talk about two examples of construction methods that have been raised. There have been others that we've received from you all, and we certainly look into each one of them, but I think these two are really instructive based on the tours that happened recently. The one thing I'll preface this with is I hope what we've described is that the performance of our facilities is based on the collective of 1,000 decisions, not individual decisions, right? And so you'll see that some of the recommendations that we receive are based on sort of that collective impact on all of our objectives for construction. And so you'll see that it's also very fact specific. So you'll find that there are methods that work in one area and may be more limited in another area. And so that's part of how we've leveraged the expertise that we have here in this room. We've got some of the best in the business assigned to this project that have been helping us understand all of that. So I'm going to introduce Paul Thompson. He's with Huckabee to talk about the first topic, which is ICF, and make sure that we'll have a common understanding of what that is and what the utilization is and what their experience with it has been in the past. And so, look, and then after that, we'll come back and have a little bit further discussion about lighting systems.
Well, good morning. See if I can figure out how to change. So this slide, Susan, you want me to go ahead and speak to this? Yeah.
Apologize, I forgot I had one slide. So this is sort of a messy Gantt chart, just to give you the understanding to highlight what I just said, is that we've got a number of objectives with every facility that we build, whether it's sustainability, the life cycle costs, some of the accessibility that we talked about earlier, the engineering analysis and what that means, and so on. And so our job is to design that answers the most significant portion of those questions and find that sweet spot among all of these sometimes competing objectives, right, in terms of the decisions that are made. So again, we sort of analyze all of that through that lens, but now I will turn it over to talk about ICF.
All right, thank you, Susan. And just to piggyback on that, one of the blessings of being an architect is the ability to really bridge the gap between what is an art form and a building science, and to weigh all of the variables and the challenges and the objectives and the goals of a project and deliver something that is an elegant design that solves challenges that the end users may have in a cost-effective and beautiful and elegant way. And one of those things that we've talked about recently, Mr. Heaton, to your point, was ICF, insulated concrete forms. And the two images on the screen that we're sharing with you are from your recent tours of a couple of facilities, one of them being a Huckabee project. A few weeks ago, the beginning of October, we toured the Academy at Nola Dunn in Burleson ISD and the Josie Lane Elementary School for Louisville ISD, which is a Huckabee project. And what I'd like to draw your attention to on the two examples, the two pictures there, first and foremost, on the right, that is from the Josie Lane Elementary School project, which was under construction at the time that we toured that. And it gave us the opportunity to really show how that system is installed and how it is put together and incorporated. And it's a wonderful system. It's a fantastic system, and it achieves a lot of tremendous goals for us to solve for energy efficiency, durability, longevity of a product. So it's one that Huckabee has a great deal of experience with, and you're not going to hear me say anything negative about ICF. We absolutely love it in the right circumstances. I want to draw your attention to the completed project on the left, and I want to point out what you're seeing there is a percentage of glass, okay? And that's really what I'm going to focus on here today, is an openness factor. Some of the challenges that we have that we successfully design around are the fact that a ICF system becomes a load-bearing exterior wall. And without getting too technical, we basically have a list of challenges for an exterior wall: the distance, the height, the amount of opening, all of those things that we have to solve for when we are presenting a final design. So what you're seeing on the left is a regular cadence. There's a systematic, there's a balance to the size of the openings and their disbursement, as well as the percentage of wall, the masonry that you see, and the percentage of glass. I just want to highlight that image because we're not going to see that picture again. So I'd like to take some time to highlight a recent publication. This is ICF Builder Magazine. In November of 2019, Huckabee was highlighted in an article along with other firms, but this really speaks to the early stages of ICF and its development and its use within the state of Texas and the country. just cite this article. I'm not going to dive into too many details, and hopefully you can see that so I don't have to read it. But the first school to use ICF construction was actually built in Pennsylvania around 2005. There were a few other campuses around the country, and we caught wind of that early on and became an early adopter, if you will. And you could probably argue that we're one of the largest proponents of use of ICF, at least in the state of Texas in the K through 12 industry for sure, with our experience. We first dabbled in this in the year 2008, 2006. We started taking some tours, went out to Kentucky, visited a facility that was using the Nudura product, actually the rep that we spoke to on our tours. And we learned about that system. We did some independent cost analysis, and we thought it was a great solution for some of the heat that we're dealing with in Texas. So actually the first school to utilize ICF in the state of Texas was Butterfield Elementary School in Sanger, which was a Huckabee school. It was opened in the year 2008. And so we have been using ICF for 12, 15 years now, looking at it. And this article cites the fact that we have built 50 schools. That was just with Nudura. There are other manufacturers out there, Fox Block, some of those others that we've built. So, and again, this was about a year ago. So we've probably, exceeded 60 plus schools. Dr. Evans, I know you're personally familiar with this. We've built 9 schools in Mansfield ISD with the ICF construction, including our award-winning Chandruco Academy, and the 3 newest schools that are about to open next fall. And I know you were instrumental in the talks and in the concerns about how we got to that system. Just since I'm mentioning Mansfield, Mansfield is an Energy Star district, and so it is a kit of parts, like we talked about on the resiliency scorecard, that allows us to get measures of betterment on the energy efficiency scale. And that's really just, you show them your energy bills, and the EUI that we spoke about earlier comes into play here. So in addition to that, I've personally signed and sealed the documents for about 6 schools using ICF, just my personal experience. These next images, the one on the left is again from our Josie Lane Elementary School in construction. The way this goes up is we assemble, and you were introduced to that system of where these kit of parts kind of assemble like Legos, really, the foam does. And there is a gap between the foam of about, in this case, it was about 6 inches, where we put the steel and the rebar, and then we pour the concrete in lifts. And our Director of Structural Engineering, Benchmark Harris, was with us out on that tour, for those of you that joined us, and was explaining that assembly a little bit. It is a very quick process compared to some of the traditional means and methods, and it can increase the speed of construction, which is very important in a K through 12 market when we've got kids coming in August. The windows typically are cut after the fact. Well, they are cut after the fact, so that we have a certain size for the window, and the location doesn't align to the blocks, and so that's the easiest way to do that. If you start creating variation in those openings, you can increase your labor cost. So again, back to that earlier image where you had the regular cadence of windows, that's all important in controlling our cost. The images on the right are showing some of the strategies that we use to get daylight and natural light into the space. Obviously, ICF being concrete is pretty heavy, so we have some foundation elements that have to directly support that. So on the exterior walls that you're seeing there in the middle image, you can see the clear story windows at the top. That allows us to put the windows above the ICF, allow the natural light in, and control that space. On the far right, what you're seeing is an infill between CMU. Notice the glass in the storefront of the curtain wall system goes all the way from the ground all the way up. We don't have ICF spanning across the top of that. We can do spans with ICF in limited nature, but again, we start reaching a limit of what this product can really address for us on a beneficial nature. And again, this is really just about the openness. So I want to talk to you about some of the codes, again, mentioning the fact that when we build with ICF construction, I now have a load-bearing wall. And really that's the crux of my problem here, and where we're comparing to the Northwest campus, where we had to get away from that to go with a non-load-bearing wall so we can increase the amount of openness that we have on our facades. That is a particular concern with buildings that are more than one buildings on a site. and the fire separation distance between buildings. Obviously, if I build a single building like a school on a site, I'm not too concerned about that fire separation distance because I may have several hundred feet to another edifice that I have to control for. In this particular campus, some of these buildings are as close as 30 feet away. And there are some parameters that control the amount of opening that I have the ability to provide for you in that case. So a picture is worth 1,000 words here. And so if you look at the two examples, the renderings on the left are from our Josie Lane Elementary School, which you toured. You see at the top a rendering from the interior, from the exterior, going through that entry. If you recall from our tour, we actually went into that space and we were standing, this works, right about there, looking back into that space when we were on our tour. You can see that, and you remember from the site location, this is off of Josie Lane, a pretty busy thoroughfare. So what an elementary school really wants to do is kind of turn to an inward perspective. We really want to kind of control from the outdoors so that the kids are more focused on what they're learning. It's a safer and a better sound attenuation from the busy traffic on the street. So it provides a number of positive benefits for us. But you can see on the top image, some of the openness of the school is not nearly what you would see on the images on the right, for example. We have to control for that. In this case, it's just more about the locations of classrooms and things like that than it is necessarily the amount of openness. We could certainly open that school more than we've done. It was just a choice to try to maximize the efficiency that the ICF form provides for us. On the right, you're seeing some images that we've shared with you and Michael has discussed a little bit. And really what this speaks to is, I didn't know a better way to describe it, but if you look on the right and you see the amount of glass and the amount of openness, again, none of these are required to be load bearing. They're not fire resistant rated. So we can basically have an unlimited amount of openness. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that on the first floor of this particular building, you can see a lot of openness and we have the mass above that glass. It would be darn near impossible for me to cantilever the ICF and start on the second floor without a large amount of steel reinforcements and things like that to get my foundation elements now above that to span to be able to come underneath that. It's not technically impossible, but it certainly adds cost to the project and it prevents us from having the openness and the learning on display and the interconnectivity between those spaces on the inside to those on the outside. All of these things I'm mentioning to you were design drivers given to us for the past 2 years for our work with the 3G8P process. And so we took those inputs and we didn't let go of ICF early. We just said, look, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to find an alternative. And that drove us to a different system of composite materials to utilize. I'd like to highlight some of the comparative analysis on this last slide just to compare the Josie Lane Elementary that we toured because it's our school. I had some data on it to share with you in the Northwest campus. We can achieve comparable or better insulative properties. The R value is the resistance to the conductivity of heat, as Michael's already described. It's a good benchmark for us to measure one building in a setting that looks completely different than another. You can compare some of these to see the impact. Again, that fire rating of the exterior wall and the amount of openingness, this is controlled by building codes. It's not something that I have the ability to go talk to the city of Fort Worth and say, hey, can we do something else and get a variance? It very rarely succeeds, and there's reasons for that, and that's protection of life and property. So those are from a code perspective, what really tips the scale for us when we start wanting to design buildings with virtually 100% open on a facade and in close proximity to one another. And then lastly, some of the interior finishes. I'll just note that on the forms that you saw installed, the foam is on both sides. So we consider the foam on the outside, what you're seeing the CI there, that's continuous insulation, that is outside the building envelope. And that foam is flammable, okay? That is okay. We can build assemblies with flammable materials. We just have to protect for them. And that's part of that equation of controlling the openness to control for that flame spread. But it also means that we have to cover the interior finishes of that material. So we have to add drywall, we have to have tile, we have to have those things. Some of the images that you'll see if you take some time to share, to view those up there, you'll see a lot of the exposed concrete interior finishes, and we're able to express that more successfully without the ICF. And so just wanted to give you a list of some of the variables and the controls of why we are not recommending using ICF for the Northwest campus. But again, I have nothing negative to say about the product. It's an excellent product, and it achieves a lot of goals. We will continue to use it and be an advocate for it. And as we've discussed with the other firms involved, we've not ruled out ICF as a solution for some of the other bond projects. Just want to share that. So anyone have any questions?
I do.
Yes, sir.
Can you speak about ICS versus alternatives from a initial cost standpoint and a sustainability standpoint?
So from the initial cost standpoint, it is more expensive to utilize ICF than traditional framing methods like whole floor metal framing, et cetera. You have increased foundation depth and pier for the load of the exterior. It sometimes can achieve an expedited construction schedule, as I mentioned. And so the time that you save can sometimes offset the initial cost. And again, it's a myriad of factors that weigh into that. But as far as an initial upfront cost, it is slightly more expensive to do the ICF.
Sustainability.
Oh, on the sustainability, as you see from the R values, we can achieve comparable or better R values with other systems of construction. What we're using is a high density bat insulation in a composite system with, as Michael mentioned, balloon framing, it's cold form metal framing. With that, on the exterior for the continuous insulation, we're utilizing steel wool, which is a non-combustible. So we don't have to worry about protecting, again, for a fire resistance rating on the exterior of the wall.
It seems like one of the reasons why you're arguing against ICF is the amount of glass, the openness of the campus and so forth.
Yes, sir.
Can you, and it looks beautiful, but can you obtain the overall energy efficiency with all that glass?
Yes, sir.
How?
We're using very sophisticated products for our fenestration, and they have embedded properties and tints and things that enable us to have more reflectivity of the heat. Solar heat gain coefficient comes into play with glass, and it allows us to reflect more of the heat out while allowing the daylight in.
Isn't that glass very expensive?
Yes, sir, but we would have to use that glass regardless, and it is less expensive overall. And we've recently done some analysis to see what could we do if we introduced ICF into this project. And we would be right about the same benchmark from an energy efficiency with either comparable cost or even more cost, and definitely would have to revisit the design of the project and reduce some of our openness.
I don't know anything about this, but have you ever looked into glass that has actually that are solar panels?
Yes, sir. We do have photovoltaics. One of our points on the scorecard is renewable energies source on campus, providing that electricity for us on campus. And so we've looked at photovoltaic solutions that will either be on canopies where they're out of sight, or they would be in the fenestration itself. And there's also some more study going on with the types of glass that we use and some of the other things that it may achieve for us on the project. Yes, sir.
Mr. Heath, this is Teresa. I have a quick question, please.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. We've heard quite a bit about the ICF and how it can withstand, heavy winds, storms, things like that. Can you talk to us a little bit about how this, having that wall that's full of glass, how that compares to the sustainability of and the strength of the ICF, and how we're going to, make sure that that's not going to be an expenditure in the event that we do have another tornado or high winds or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about that and see how what measures we've taken to make sure that this can sustain that?
Yes,
withstand?
There are building codes that require the comprehensive total of the building to withstand certain wind speeds. up to 110 miles an hour, for example, in certain circumstances. We need to be careful, though, because what your question is really leading to is protection from tornadoes, and I think you mentioned that. We are not building a tornado shelter at the Northwest campus. We have one at the Josie Lane Elementary School. They are now required. A couple of years ago, they started requiring, the stuck guns. We've started requiring putting tornado shelters in K through 12 schools. E-occupancy schools are required. But Huckabee, you can do a storm shelter out of ICF. Okay. The problem becomes once you have completed that and you commission that, it is very hard to get it inspected because there are very stringent requirements for how I build that. In other words, I can't have a hole greater than 2 inches in any of the surfaces. And there's a very tight tolerance for the pipe size that goes through that, obviously. We have to baffle mechanical systems and things like that. So it's not the ICF alone that is providing the benefits of this, for storm protection. It is a more robust system. But to say that just because I build my school or my facility out of ICF, it's going to withstand a storm would be an inaccurate statement. I'd have to do some other engineering, more steel, things like that within that system to be able to say that.
ICF 500, I think, is
Yes, sir.
the standard.
Yes, sir.
Are you not going to build any storm shelter on Northwest?
No, sir.
Really? I
No,
thought
sir.
that was a requirement.
Yes, sir. No, not in a B occupancy. Higher education is a B occupancy, not an E occupancy. So it's not required by code. And we haven't seen that. We haven't had that directive to include.
So, Mr. Heath, my question, if I may, to that question about the glass. So what is this particular glass that you have? What sort of winds did you say, speeds that it could withstand?
So again, we are just complying with the code for this region.
Right.
I don't have that information off the top of my head. But
That would be really helpful for us to know, merely because, again, one of the reasons we're going through this exercise, of course, is because it withstood a very high winds and a tornado. So we need to make sure that, we've got that information.
Well, again, I want to stress that just because of a building is built with ICF, it's not going to withstand a tornado unless I build it with standards of ICC 500.
Right. No, I get that, sir. What I was just trying to make sure is, when we have all that glass around, we just want to know to what it would be able to withstand. I think it's a very reasonable question. Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we can get you the technical specifics on that. Sorry, I don't have that available. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Heath, I do have a question. What direction will that be facing, that glass wall?
The image at the top, that is actually facing northwest.
Okay. And the bottom is just the same thing? Is that what the bottom one is?
The bottom is actually an image. So what you're seeing there above is a perspective looking back at the Crow's Nest feature of Building 4. And what you're seeing at the bottom is the atrium. So you're standing within that building. Now you're looking back within that building's atrium towards the northeast from that vantage point in that rendering.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Yes, ma'am.
Have you also, one other question, looked into the difference in insurance cost? I don't know if that's significant, but when you have that much glass versus a wall?
No, I think that's pretty negligible. But the one concern that Walter and his team did have was the maintenance and the cleaning of all that glass, and the need to protect for that. So that is one factor that we've looked at. We're going to have some mechanical davits at the top of the building so that people can come down and clean that glass for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Heath, I'm sorry, one further question. I recall that we had a presentation, and it's been some time back, about some of the challenges from a Wi-Fi perspective. I know technology perspective, having these in a building that has a lot of glass. So is there somebody that can talk a little bit about whether those are going to be challenges that we might have to deal with as well with this wall of glass? I think we talked about it at one of the performing arts centers. That was one of the things that our IT folks talked about.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. What was the question?
Sure. So previously, we had a presentation about a facility, and one of the things that came up was when you have a lot of glass in a facility, in a building, there are some technology challenges from a Wi-Fi perspective, access. So I just wondered if you could talk to that, or are we at that point where somebody could kind of articulate if that's something we need to be concerned about?
It's not my area of expertise, but I can speak to it because we have had conversations specific to this project.
Okay.
And we are, this is going to be a very robust Wi-Fi experience for the faculty and staff and students on this campus. So we are having wireless access points throughout the building and more so where we have areas of the glass to compensate for that, that transmission loss that you would have in that. Also wireless access points on the site and in the parking lot as well.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
And who came up with the idea of using all this glass? I mean, is that your design work or is that input from
again
college or?
It was input from the stakeholders that we've been working with to really drive us to the solution that we're showing you where we really are. I mean, if you look at the connectivity of building 2 and 4, for example, those open atriums, really when you're standing in one, you're going to see the space in the other building and then the outdoor space between. So it becomes like an outdoor living room into the other space. So you're seeing what's going on in that other building. So if you're a new student coming into building 2 and you're excited about science, you'll be able to look into a science lab and actually see what's going on in that science lab. So it's going to draw you to your interest and hopefully retain you on campus. That's the goal. But it is really expressing that indoor-outdoor relationship in the buildings and the connectivity between each other that we're trying to solve.
I could remind that early on we discussed the stakeholder input, particularly as it relates to students. And the 3 items that came out loud and clear with the students was open, accessible, and comfortable. So those have been drivers, if you will, in all the discussions, whether it's programs, services, staffing, layout, or finishes, whatever the case may be. So,
yes, sir.
So those have been considerations throughout our whole planning process, whether it be construction or whether it be programs and services.
Yes, sir. All right, well, thank you very much.
So, Jean, I have a question for you. As part of this construction also going to address the early college high school, is that correct?
Yes. Susan, you'll have a specific on that.
Yes, actually one of the first buildings that's intended to be built will house the early college high school. We are having conversations with Fort Worth ISD right now about their participation in the cost of that finish out. I will share with you that because it's an early building, it will also serve as swing space during construction. And so it'll be several years before they actually occupy that space as we transition everybody into their permanent homes. But they've had the opportunity to weigh in on the attributes of the space as well to ensure that it meets their needs.
And they're aware as well that it's going to be years before they can get into the space?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. It's Gwen Morrison. In relation to that question about the early college high school, is this on Northwest campus?
Yes.
So will 2 districts be involved in that early college high school, or is it going to be redesigned?
It'll accommodate the Fort Worth ISD in that particular space. That's who is on campus today.
So what happened with our partnership with the other school district?
So it may be Northwest ISD that you're thinking about, and a lot of those are actually housed on the campuses of the school districts rather than co-located on the college campus. But I don't know if do you have anything to add to that?
They're on their campuses.
Yeah.
Well, in follow-up to that question, then a good thing that would interest me would be an overview of our early college, high school partnerships and engagements. I think not only would that benefit me, would also benefit the public as people planned for next year, but also as a part of this whole bond rollout program. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, we ready to move on? So we're going to shift gears a little bit here to the second illustration that we wanted to provide today, and that's has to do with lighting systems. And we've been studying it, and as you know, we've engaged a lot with partners who are using different types of technology. And so we've had conversations not only with our own experts, but with other folks that are using POE for different purposes. One of the things I will share with you is that this was a little bit harder to think about how to present the information because it is a lesser used technology. And so there's not good examples right now with our partners in terms of making regular recommendations for a technology like this in the projects that they've been involved in. And so that's been a lot of our discussion. I will tell you that them not having historically used that is not conclusive, but it's educational for us to think about why it is or is not consuming part of the market. But one of the things that I think that would be beneficial, because it's been beneficial for me along the way, is to spend a little bit of time understanding first the lighting systems that we're using here, what the differences are between it and differences and commonalities between it and POE, and then what we've been doing over the last 5, 6, 7 years in terms of our lighting system upgrades and that have resulted in some of our energy efficiencies that have happened so far. So what you'll see also is that that we want to offer some advice in terms of how wide scale usage of this would be appropriate for our projects. And I think we've got a suggestion for you at the end that we'll talk a little bit about in terms of how we explore this option further. But what I'd like to do is turn this over to Walt for a few minutes just to describe some of the attributes of the systems that we're using today so that you can learn what I had to learn through the process as well.
Just want to start out by thanking y'all for your support over the years and also thanking you for the challenge. We all get better when we're challenged, and it makes us think and makes us really sharp on our pencils and really get into things, and we appreciate that. I wanted to start out, I guess, with the, let me make sure I can work this. There we go. With a basic history and kind of contrast of our typical system and the POE system. To start out there, I've contemplated whether I'm going to go across this horizontally or vertically or what, but I think I'm going to go vertically. So I'm going to start on the TCC standard, which is the second column there. You'll see a note there that says 30% of our district has currently been converted to this system, and mainly that's been driven by trying to replace, I guess, lighting that's 3 generations old. If you're familiar with a T12, those are old fat fluorescent tubes. We still have that. So that's a focus of replacement as well as classrooms. In other words, to be able to get that technology into the classroom where it has advantage for the student, which is what we're all about. With that said, basically the standard consists of lighting fixtures that are Lithonia, more so known now as Acuity brands. Lithonia is the biggest lighting manufacturer in the United States. The control system that accompanies that is called Enlight. The power source typically is 277 volt AC power, okay? You can do it at 120 like you have at your house, but typically we do this at 277. You try to go higher voltage because it means smaller wire and it means less cost. Typically, you do that when you can. The control cabling for the Enlight system is Cat 5, Cat 6, regular cables like you see here, the blue ones, stringing across your tables. Typically Cat 5, I believe, because Cat 6 is like high capacity and there's really not that much information going back and forth on a lighting system. It's on or it's off or it's dimmed. And our front end for that, where we kind of interface with that system, is called Acuity Control Sensor View. So it's a software package. Okay. To contrast that with the POE, I'm going to go down the column here now on the right. As far as the fixtures, there's numerous suppliers. out there. There's some very big ones. Hubble would come to mind, a big lighting manufacturer, and some very small ones that are popping up and disappearing every day. I noted there that they are DC powered, and really all LEDs are DC. It's just where you make that conversion from AC to DC that we're really talking about here. The controls for the system are varied and kind of fuzzy for us. We're not really in that world, but they vary with the piece of hardware. And that's an inconsistency, again, that we think is not necessarily advantageous to the way we do business. The power source is a little complicated. You can kind of see there if you read, there's digital power servers, and a lot of y'all observe this stuff out in the field at the Sinclair that feed PoE switches. You'll recognize the name there, Cisco. We have plenty of Cisco stuff around here. And there's some smaller people, PoE Texas, Micro Semi. But basically from those pieces of equipment, we go through a number of conversions. We go from AC to DC. In some cases, we go from DC back to AC and then back to DC in order to get the configuration needed in these systems. So there's a lots of pieces and parts to them. They're not simple systems. They are connected, again, through the Cat5 cabling if we move down the spreadsheet here. And that's the supposed advantage that the same cable that carries the power carries the data. Lastly, as far as their front end, how they interface, we're still researching that. We've asked several providers about those tools and really haven't got much response back, although I'm sure they're just as comparable to the things that we use. So moving down, bullet-wise, TCC uses PoE for certain functions now. I think we've all heard that. One example would be WAPs, which is a wireless access point. You'll see those around the room. There's one right here with the thing with the fins on it. They're all around. They provide our wireless service. So that's an example of something we use that has PoE. But we don't use it yet for lighting. Just to back up a little bit in history, we began systematic upgrade of interior and exterior lighting back in 2012 when we adopted basically this Acuity brand system. Basically, it was a search between 4 large suppliers, and they seem to have the best balance of our objectives. And those objectives are enhance the learning environment, and most importantly, reduce energy consumption, facilitate energy code compliance, enhance safety, and one that I left off is minimize maintenance requirements. So those were the criteria we were looking for when we look for a system, and frankly, when we look for any system. After that search, we felt it best to go with Acuity. Again, they're the biggest. They are stable. They're consistent. We know what they're going to offer and how they're going to offer it. And they're readily accessible. And there's a huge network that supports them. And that was why that decision was made. I wanted to distinguish a little bit as far as decision making. Again, we try to meet those objectives. If we can meet those objectives and innovate, we do that. But if we can meet those objectives and not necessarily do innovate, quote unquote, then we don't. We look for the simplest things that will fulfill the objectives. Any questions? Okay. Second slide here. This is kind of a scorecard, I guess you'd say. These are the attributes that we looked at with regard to our systems in comparison with PoE. I would reiterate one thing that Susan said, which is it's kind of very difficult to make comparisons when there's really not a lot of sample. There's just, the systems are so few that it's hard to get research data, and it's difficult to get performance data that's objective. So anyway, the chart contrasts the attributes based on TCC requirements. Again, other folks with requirements may lead to other answers, but this is based on our requirements and our objectives that I mentioned on the other page. And thirdly, I'd like to say before I kind of get into it is, you know, there are claims and there are notions and there are common sense, but what we try to apply in our system selections is engineering rigor and really digging in and getting factual information that's repeatable and backed up. So starting out there, functionality and energy consumption, essentially, we believe we have two equal signs there, right? We're saying that basically the key is an equal sign or a check mark. Equal means just that. A check mark means we think it's a superior product. So we're saying on functionality and energy consumption, we believe the systems are equal. There's only 1.5, which is a weird way to count it, things that we identify that POE can do that our system cannot do. One of those is to meter exact energy consumption that a light is using. And we believe that's of limited use. It's nice to know, but it's not very actionable. The other thing, the half part of it is if you have a space that you want to be ultimately flexible, be able to knock down a wall or move a movable wall and move a fixture, then POE has a half advantage in that. I say half because Lithonia Acuity has a solution for that as well, if that's really a desired attribute. Moving down, infrastructure costs and complexity. We have had no luck at soliciting and getting, well, we've solicited, but obtaining cost data on this. In other words, the claim is that there's a big cost differential, that it's a lot cheaper, you're cutting out electricians, whatever the premise is. We have found no substantiation of that claim. As far as complexity, well, I'll have another slide later on that'll kind of get into this in depth, but the proliferation of devices and cabling are in a lot of cases an order of magnitude above what we do now. In other words, it's many more pieces and parts and cable connections. And that's significant on the next one, maintenance, because our maintenance of these systems are basically cable failures and device failures. And if you're multiplying those pieces and those cables, it multiplies the maintenance effort. The other thing to note in maintenance is that there would require a lot of overlap between the facilities operations and IT. In other words, it'll be not a battle, but I guess more intense interaction to figure out whose problem it is when there's something goes wrong. Or is it an IT issue, or is it a power issue, or just what is it? A real important one is network security, okay? These systems, again, are touted to run over networks, computer networks, and there's security issues. TCC right now is going through a huge exercise on tightening up our security on our IT side. And so there's implications in this system as well. Moving down to integration, typically any modern system can be integrated. It's debatable whether some are easier than others, but they all have communications protocols. They all run on databases, and in theory, all can be integrated. So that's not a particular advantage that we see. Smart sensing, we think they're equal in that as well. Acuity and other companies as well have offerings just like the POE side has. And lastly, suppliers. The original tenet we had to back ourselves up to a big provider with stability and consistency, I think still resonates. POE is still finding itself. Cree Lighting, I think you've probably heard of that. You've probably seen them at Home Depot. They were a POE provider. They have dropped that business now as well. We heard that at a meeting the other day with Mr. Oslam on our DOE project we're working with on him. So anyway, still a lot of instability and uncertainty on that side. Any questions on that one?
Yes, Mr. Heath?
Yes.
This is Teresa. Yes. Thank you for that, Walter. I'm sorry, I was looking at the presentation a moment ago, and there was a question that I had on one of the bullets that you were talking about around maintenance. And it was around, and I'm sorry, I don't have it here in front of me, but it said something about maintenance Thank you. It's the next slide. I'm sorry.
I think that's it.
Okay. Yeah, where it talks about maintenance and network security. So when you talk about those, it's not that it's more expensive. Are you saying that it's more expensive because of the fact that there's overlap of interaction of facilities, or can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it just seems to me that if it's cable is, it's not, you can buy that by the ring. I mean, that's so can you talk a little bit about what you mean by that there around the network security and maintenance?
Well, I guess I didn't really reference cost so much as just complication of maintenance. In other words, now you have kind of two bodies that are responsible for a system, and where is the line? We have that to some degree now because all of these systems feed into the IP network at some point.
Right.
But we've kind of lowered that point where they feed in, I guess taking it further downstream. And so being able to determine who's responsible when issues arise is not insurmountable. It's just more than we typically have to do on the other system.
So because you have the background in electrical versus, the IT piece of it, do we know, is it easier to, if there is an issue, is it easier to discover or to uncover it based on, from an IT perspective? Is that what you're talking about versus electrical? Y'all wouldn't be able to determine where the issue is or something like that if something's hardwired, running with a PoE cable?
Yeah, I mean, the next slide will show a little bit more about that, but we think it's probably likely harder to troubleshoot just from the quantity of cabling and connections. And the next slide, I think, will illustrate that a little bit better.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, you mentioned safety is one of the things. Inherently, it seems to me if you use an Ethernet cables, it's low voltage. There's no sparking. There's no possible electrocution or starting fires or something like that. That's one of the advantages, in my understanding, of PoE versus standard systems. And in the same regard, in terms of construction, if you're using a contractor that is used to installing low voltage systems, that because they don't have to use a licensed electrician, that seems like you'd have a heck of a cost savings.
Well, I would say two things. The premise of the lack of safety in, I guess, a conventional system, I think is a bit overstated. We take provisions so that we can work on these systems safely. For example, you can put so many more LED lights on a circuit than you could older technology because it draws less power. Okay, so what that gets you into in a practical sense, you may be able to put 5 classrooms on one circuit where you could never do that before. So what we do is we have a provision in each classroom where we can isolate them and not take down other rooms. The individual fixtures also have a disconnect at them, so you can disconnect main power from them as well at the fixture. So, and as far as the cost, as I said before, we haven't been able to substantiate that. We have a claim and we have a notion and we have what common sense might tell us, but we don't have numbers. So, and we've asked.
Walter, this is Teresa again. On the piece around integrations with other systems, are you mean with an LED PoE and something else, or just between the two of them?
No, I'm talking about, for example, lighting and HVAC, which we have a project right now at Northwest at Fire Service Building to do that. Okay.
Okay, so that means the feasibility are equal if we wanted to incorporate maybe certain classrooms, things like that. That's something that that's feasible to do?
Certainly, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Walter, one other question regarding maintenance. And I'm not an engineer, so you'll have to correct me on this if I'm wrong, but my understanding is with the PoE system, if every single fixture has an identification, and does feedback to one central system, whereby if we have one light that goes out or whatever, you know that immediately just by looking at this one system. So you don't have to look for a light going out. You know exactly where it is, and it's even more predictable to know the lifespan of that particular fixture. So you could do preventive maintenance as well.
Right. I would say that kind of what I said at the very beginning, that's a capability of the in-light system as well. Now, the second thing you said gets more into analytics that in-light does as well. We don't do it yet with in-light, but it's capable of doing it.
And I just one other question.
Yes, sir.
When you talk about energy efficiency, it just seems to be inherently impossible to have the same energy efficiency when you're using a 110 or 220 system or whatever that then goes to a fixture and you're consuming energy because you have that driver in there to go to a DC system, which is all what LED lights are. And so you have an energy loss at that point of 8 to 14% for each and every fixture that you have in your building. And I don't see how you can equate the energy efficiency of both systems.
Well, again, the biggest reason is because there's not a lot of, proven bodies of research on it. We've read some DOE documents that kind of estimate the differential at about 1%. Because you got to remember this too, and I noted it on the first slide. In certain configurations, the Marcel Hotel that Farouk is working on, they're doing multiple conversions AC to DC. Well, there's an inefficiency there as well. They're going AC to DC back to 400 hertz power to do some kind of function or get further distance or whatever it is it's doing. I don't understand it all, but I understand its conversion, and then back to DC. So there's inefficiencies as well in those. The proof of the pudding would be a study done by a reputable body that would conclude that savings, but we were unable to find that, and we asked multiple sources.
Isn't that one of the purposes of the DOE grant? To look at POE in that regard?
It's looking at POE as a tool, I guess, to do another function, which is load control. So, I mean, but in theory, any lighting control system is capable of doing that. But yeah, I mean, that's in the pipe. We don't have data.
Mr. Heed, I have another question. I just wondered, are there any credits that we would earn by going from one type of source over another from let's say, I'm just thinking I don't know if this has anything to do with energy, but is that possible? And then the second question I have is there any sort of impact to, as far as insurance and things like that, if you go to POE versus electrical? Do we know that? If there's a cost difference in insuring a building and things like that?
We do not know, but we can ask that question. We did not ask it and don't know it, but we will.
All right, thank you. Mm-hmm. And the other one about energy credits, if that's possible, I don't know, just curious.
Well, those are typically tied to efficiency. So I would assume that POE gets you at least what an LED conventional system does, maybe more. But again, it's so new, I'm not sure they're making that distinction yet as far as like Encore or those types that give out those incentives. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm probably taking too much time here. I'm getting a look. Okay, so my last slide here is concerning basically what we talked about before, and I'll go through it quick, but it's just meant to be illustrative of the complexity I referenced here earlier. On the left, you'll see our in-light system, our TCC standard system. So these are the components basically between the power source, AC power, and the light fixture, okay? So in order to do, and this was based on the Marcel Hotel, and you might say that's not a fair comparison. There's 165 rooms in a hotel, but we also kind of looked at it and said, well, if we scaled up our SETC building by half, we'd have the same area, we'd have 50 classrooms. It's probably more or less comparable. Debatable for sure, but I believe it's fair. But anyway, long story short, to do the power and control that we do on our lighting system on TCC standard, there's basically 30 components needed. All these components are somewhere between the size of a suitcase and a pack of cigarettes. But there's 30 that we would need to do that, and everything else would be cabling connecting those. For the Marcel Hotel example, there were close to 1,000 components, 1,000 boxes of different sizes that do different things. So again, that just points to the challenge, I think, of POE is that complexity and having to deal with that complexity on a day-to-day basis and keep things running. Most of this stuff's pretty reliable once you get it set up, but there are always maintenance that you have to do on systems. Any questions?
Just a statement, just based upon what you presented to us. It looks like, in regard to even maintaining the POE system can cost us a lot of people hours, so to speak, which is not shown here in your presentation, but it looks like it would be, it'll cost us more to try to maintain that with employees, am I right?
It's certainly probably more time.
Okay. More money. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it would take, Walter, I think it would take an engineer to really comment on some of your things here, but, and there's not an engineer on the board, so we'll reserve judgment on that.
So here's what I'd like to put it in a few more layperson's terms too, because I've spent a lot of time with different parties involved in this, as well as our partners that are here today, as well as with some groups that have been installing this to try to understand. And I will tell you the most fundamental thing that I didn't get before we started having this conversation is that both systems use LED lighting, which is where we've gotten a lot of efficiency to date. However, it's about how the energy arrives and the fixtures that you use, but we have the control system that Walt described in place that provides a lot of the benefit that you heard. And so he mentioned, occupancy sensing and daylight sensing and those kinds of things that allow lights to go off when nobody's around or at night and that kind of thing. What I'm displaying to you here on this slide, though, is that we had a conversation with the folks that have been helping us do the conversion of our lighting systems on the campus for a number of years. And this is a dashboard of the data collection that those systems can do and that we can use to really be assessing how we're doing. We have not been doing that yet, as we mentioned earlier today, that we're only at about a 30% conversion at this point where we're penetrating the lighting systems on our campuses where this data will start to be useful. But they've certainly made that available. But one of the conversations we had at length was, sometimes the market speaks to you in terms of where the research and development goes and then who starts manufacturing what. And I think that's where the prevalence of the systems that we're using has emerged. POE's been around for a while and the market hasn't quite responded that way. Doesn't mean that it won't in the future. And so, one of the things we joked about, and I'm going to age myself here, is it was sort of the VHS versus Betamax question. Which direction is the market going to go over time, and how do you predict that, and how do you operate in between in terms of staying current and getting the results that you want over time? There are some innovations that Walt alluded to that are being implemented today. And so you see the first two that have to do with integrating our systems up at the fire service building, as well as some piloting with the HVAC controls up at Seattle. We also, and when you talk to the market, there's going to probably be more about smart devices and eventually wireless and so on. So the market's going to continue to move, and we're going to continue to respond to that over time. But I think one of the key takeaways at this point is that there's not substantial use cases and data that really make the case for some of the efficiency questions and the risk associated with going this direction, sort of, all in. However, we've also heard from you a desire to integrate it with curriculum and teaching tools as well. And so I think, actually, I'm sorry, before I get to our suggestion, let me talk for a minute too. We spent some time visiting with Clemson University and those folks, because a number of years ago, they did probably one of the early higher ed applications of this, and they had different objectives. I believe that they had a funding partner that helped them with some of the installation with this as an objective. In addition, it was an innovation center that was highly tech-oriented, and so it was a little bit different than a normal academic building in terms of the technology that was installed in the building. And so they did PoE lighting at that time. We pressed pretty hard to understand what they perceive the benefits are. The guy that we talked to was on the IT side of the fence, and so he was sort of enthusiastic about the innovation of all of this and the fact that their IT people could change out light bulbs and move light fixtures. And that space that they're in is a very, very flexible space that requires moving walls and things like that on a regular basis. And he felt like it gave them more control than perhaps relying on their facilities folks to take care of some of that. It sounded like until recently they haven't been using a lot of the data as effectively or widely as perhaps they intended to, although I think they're trying to do more of that. And they have not expanded this technology to other building improvements that they've done. And so, again, not conclusive, but instructive for us to try to understand from other folks' experience with that. There is a healthy tension between IT and building maintenance. I mean, you heard it a minute ago. Will there be more or less labor cost associated with that? I don't know, because again, not having substantial data or test cases to fully understand that. But what we would suggest, and I alluded to this just a moment ago, is that we think that there's an opportunity to understand this better. It is one of the tools that is taught in our certification programs among an array of things that a student would see in the market. But we are about to renovate SELE. We're about to start the design work on that this spring because of its age and deterioration. It's a location where some of the relevant coursework associated with these kinds of certifications actually occurs. And so we think it might be a good opportunity on a smaller scale to test this technology and start gathering some of the data that we've described as unavailable right now. And so 13,000 square foot, it's smaller. I think what you've heard from staff is the concerns about a large scale without the level of experience that we think would be appropriate up at Northwest, but we think that this would be an interesting opportunity for us to put our toe in the water and think about where this takes us in the future. Again, we've seen a lot of organizations that are experimenting with this or planning to do things with this in the future. But again, we're sort of at the cusp of a stage where we're concerned that it's not robust enough for us to apply to Northwest in particular at this point with the buildings that we're completing design on. So if you're comfortable with this, what we would suggest is we do a little bit of a deeper dive into this particular facility to start heading down that path. And then we would bring it back to you in the spring in terms of the design work and the construction planning for that particular facility, but be happy to answer any questions.
Tell me again, what building and where?
It's at South Campus, and it's SELE, our favorite wayfinding building names, but I've got it located on the side.
Intuitive finding?
That's
right. That really helps me out.
Well,
okay.
Our intent is, yes, we're having lots of discussions through the 3G8P panels right now about wayfinding and how to make that better going forward. But you see a little tiny site plan on your slide deck that indicates where it's at. I didn't say it out loud, but it's certainly on the slide that there's again an academic connection at that particular site that we think makes a lot of sense.
I think it's a great idea to do a little experimenting and see how much it costs and see where it goes. I think that's a really good idea. And then you can give me some directions how to find it.
I will draw you a map. Well, someone's going to have to draw the map for me too, probably, but.
So,
Any
Susan,
other? Go ahead, Ms.
Yes,
Stile. Go ahead.
Me. Yes, Susan, so will you be using some of the standards that we're going to be evaluating as a framework to do this evaluation as well? So in other words, we would give our feedback on the standards, then you would use that for this project? Is that how you would do it?
So what I would suggest is that I think that the renovation would follow the standards that we generally apply across the district, conforming to our published guide. But in particular, at this location, we would be applying a POE lighting system to test that. I would also suggest that on the front end of that, we would establish how we would evaluate throughout it to make sure that it's useful from the perspective of data gathering and us understanding how well it went or didn't go.
So you'll be using the standards, but you're going to be, is that correct? You will be using the standards, but not anything that we've, not anything that we suggest for recommendations for changes to the standards. Is that correct? So the standards as they are today.
That is correct, with the exception that we would be experimenting with the POE lighting system.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
It does make sense, but I just wondered if okay, we can talk about it. I have a few other questions, but I'll just jot those down.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, and I will tell you, just because of the complexity and technical nature of the combination of standards, that's part of what our objective today has been, is to talk about, help us define what outcomes you're wanting to have happen across the college. And we'll provide advice to you about how to get there. And we think that would be an effective way, particularly since buildings across the college are in a 30-year span of condition and repair. So different needs on different campuses for sure.
Okay, thank you for that.
Good. Okay. Any other questions? Next steps. Up on the screen here in November, we will have a bond quarterly update. The owner's rep contract, the Jacobs contract, will come before you, as well as the next design contracts for both Northwest and Southeast. And it was mentioned a few times, we will have a wayfinding contract that is a significant deficiency that we have as an organization related to wayfinding on the campuses. In January, February timeframe, we will propose sustainability and policy goals for discussion and to be adopted by the board when they're finalized, and communicating those development plans. Also on the horizon will begin analysis of the design of what you just heard of the SELE renovation related to the inclusion of POE. And then early 2021, as we indicated, today was about accessibility and sustainability. Early 2021, we will have a similar workshop related to technology goals related to the overall capital plan. So with that, the only other caveat I would say is the green hairy foot was not my idea.
Is that grass? Is that supposed to be grass? Flowers.
It can be whatever you want it to be.
With all due respect, that looks like your foot.
Us golfers would say there are 5 tee boxes and it's a hole over water. So.
Well, you're right. Then is there a sand trap there in the middle somewhere, probably?
It can be.
Yeah, okay. I get it.
Mr. Reed, that concludes the workshop agenda. If there's any other thoughts, comments, questions that the board may have.
Questions, comments?
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank staff and all participants for the information they provided. I've tried to do a good job of listening today. Haven't asked a lot of questions. Doesn't mean I wasn't attentive. I'm just going to wait for more of the bottom line recommendations from all the experts in the room. And it occurs to me that this journey over the next few years is going to require an added level of engagement and commitment from all of us. And I appreciate the plan laid out by the Chancellor to give us a preview of what that might look like for planning purposes. And I would encourage all of us to not only ask the questions that we really feel in our souls that need to be answered, but also for staff to make sure they give us the information that we need to help us make the very best decisions possible. So there were a couple of terms that I wrote down in the course of the commentary. One was good enough, and the other one, which I mentioned before, which I'm sure you all have a box of 3x5 cards that's labeled Dr. Morrison's questions that says, why not the best? And so the question would be, what is best? And I think that's what we're all looking for here. Not only what's best for today, but as we go forward. I certainly want to be a part of a board, continue to be a part of a board who feels that we've made the very best decision that we could at any point, given the very best information that we had before us. And I'm pleased to be a part of this working, very dedicated board, and I appreciate the chancellor, the staff, and all people that he brings to the table to help us continue this legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Morrison. Any other comments, suggestions, questions? We will not have a closed session, so with the absence of any further business, we are adjourned.